Well, we're in our second week of having our life placed on hold because of the coronavirus. I mean, if you think about how fast it's changed, we're living day by day with new guidelines and procedures that come out as our leaders try to figure out the best course of action. And we're grateful for the leadership that we have and the rules that maybe seem inconvenient, but if it stops the spread of the virus, we're grateful for it. So now, with that being said, if you've been out of your house and ventured in community, you've probably noticed some people are on edge a little bit, right? They're just high-strung right now, and people are getting a little stressed out with this worldwide pandemic, we would say, and most of them are being civil when I'm going out. Most people are being civil toward one another, helping one another. However, there are a few, well, let's just say, they're not playing well with others. They're not. You've seen some of the videos I have also of people going in a store and buying up. I don't know why we have a fascination with toilet paper during crisis. It's not like that's one of the side effects is diarrhea. I don't know what is up with that, but people are buying and hoarding toilet paper and paper goods. And there was a video I watched yesterday of a lady filming another lady. They're loading a pickup truck. They have two carts, two big carts they just wheeled out, and they're loading it. And the other is filming it and said, what are you doing with all this? You know, and just, it's getting at some points, and we sense that. Now, I totally get an unbeliever acting like an unbeliever. I do. They're lost, they're without hope, they're in the middle of a crisis. How do you expect them to act? The worst is going to come out. I get that. You know, I sense that. I believe that it's going to happen. However, what about you and what about me? If you are a believer, follow Jesus Christ, we have to ask, are we displaying Christ in all situations? Or is the old man being roused from his slumber? Because in the middle of a crisis, it didn't take a lot to bring your old nature up. It just doesn't. And so we have to be very careful. We have to guard ourselves. Because we know that every single believer has a dual nature. You do. You have a nature, the new nature, which wants to follow Christ, the born-again nature that wants to do things God's way. We also have the old nature who wants to operate in the flesh and do what it wants. It doesn't matter what the consequences are. Well, I sincerely hope you're crucifying the flesh in the midst of this epidemic, because some people are going to try to test you during this time. I promise you, there are button pushers out there, and they're going to try to get you upset. Well, Paul addresses the believer and their behavior after he just taught, if you remember last week, to keep our hearts and minds focused on things above where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. There's going to be the reality of the flesh wanting to come out and play. So we have to be careful on that, and Paul is going to address that after he teaches us to keep our hearts and minds focused on things above, to keep our minds on the eternal. The reality is that we live in a fallen world, and the flesh wants to come back out and dominate us. He said this is something you're going to have to contend with. Every single believer has to deal with this. So during the midst of this crisis, we need to be showing Christ. Let's see what Paul is addressing. We'll go to Colossians 3:5. 3:5 is where we'll start at. Therefore, put to death your members which are on earth, fornication, uncleanness, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry. Now, this is a partial list. This is not by any means a complete list of all the acts of the flesh. It's not. It's actually a very small sliver. We'll look at another passage in Galatians that's going to expound on this, but understand even that's not a complete list. There are other categories underneath there. But we're told, therefore, and we look at therefore, based on us trying to keep our heart and mind focused on Christ, therefore, we have to do something about it, right? We have to do something on our part. And our part, put to death the members on earth. Put to death the flesh. Okay? We have to crucify the flesh. Now, I wish it was one time you crucified it, it was dead and never came back up. It's a continual crucifying the flesh, because the flesh never really dies. You have to keep on putting in check. You have to keep on crucifying it. You have to keep on taking care of it. It's not a one-time act. I wish it was. If it were, it would be so easy. But it's not, because the flesh wants to keep on coming out. Once again, this, we're told, how to end the wickedness in us. We have to put to death. You can't let it rule. You can't let it take charge, even though it wants to. Partial list. He talks to the church, the believers in Galatia, in the book of Galatians, and he's going to address the same topic with them, because all of us have the same problem. We have a fallen nature. Every single believer has that dual nature, the old man and the new man, and they're in conflict with one another. But he addresses it a little bit differently in Galatians. So if you'll turn there with me in Galatians 5:19 through 21, he's going to address the church in Galatia similarly, but a little bit more in depth. Maybe they had bigger sin problems there, I don't know. But he calls it what it is. Look at me in verse 19. Now the works of the flesh are evident. He's saying this is the flesh nature, and the works of it goes without saying. You can see them right away. They're evident. Okay? They are adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lewdness, idolatry, sorcery, hatred, contentions, jealousies, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambitions, dissensions, heresies, envy, murderers, drunkenness, revelries, and the like of. That, you know what that and the like of means? Etc., etc., etc. Because he can go on, naming the works of the flesh. And all these are an umbrella with a whole bunch of others underneath it. So each category, he says, is just a big umbrella, because you can fine-tune or put a whole lot of subpoints underneath each of these. And he says, of the like, and I tell you, which beforehand, just as I told you in time past, those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. Those who live in the flesh cannot live in the spirit if they don't know Jesus Christ. That you can't. Those who don't know Christ without hope, that's all they have to work with. All they have is a flesh, and they operate from the flesh, and they're expected to operate from the flesh because that's all they have. Okay, the unsaved are going to act like the unsaved. It's to redeem those who know Jesus Christ, those who have the new nature, that's supposed to not let this come to the forefront. It's going to try, because you still possess your fallen nature. It's going to try to take control. It's going to try to come up. It's going to try to rule you. But you are the one in control, not letting it, because you crucify, you end it, you suppress it, whatever you want to say. You are not going to have control. This is the temple of the Holy Spirit. I'm going to do things God's way, but there's always a battle for that. If we don't crucify the flesh, it will dominate us. I promise you it will. Can I just tell you, everyone sitting in a prison has been dominated by the flesh. Do you understand that? Everyone who's being punished for their acts right now, the flesh dominated them. Now, those without Christ, what did you expect, right? The flesh came, acted out. It's worse for those who are a believer. Now, there's a lot of people who come to know Christ in prison. I get that, and I'm glad for it. But if a believer's in prison because the flesh dominated them, that's a sadder story, because they could have had victory and they chose the flesh to lead them, and that's where they are. And it doesn't take much. I mean, I remember visiting in a prison, and it was an open visitation. Someone asked me to go with them to go visit someone that I didn't even know, so I went with them, and they had open visitation. That meant that people came and sat, and I couldn't tell who the convicts were and the people visiting. It looked like all of them could be in there at some point. And I was getting a little judgmental, I guess, looking around, and then the Spirit of God just made it clear to me, and I thought that it will never, ever leave me, kind of etched in my memory, and it was just this: do you know you're only one bad decision from being here yourself? Can I tell you, after you walk in a prison and the door's shut behind you and you hear that sound and you know that you're in there, and you hope that you don't look like another inmate who just escaped? I mean, you just don't know. But do you understand that every single person is one mistake away from letting the flesh ruin the rest of their life? One decision. That should scare you a little bit. If not, go think that in a prison cell. It will really scare you. We're one bad decision from ruining our life. Well, how do you not let that happen? Well, Paul addresses it a little bit earlier in Galatians 5, 16, 17. Here's what the believer needs to know. He says, I say then, walk in the Spirit, and you will not fulfill the lust of the flesh. For the lust of the flesh, it is against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. These are contrary to one another, so that you do not do the things you wish. See, he's saying, listen, there is a battle inside every single believer. But if you walk in the Spirit, then you won't fulfill the lust of the flesh. So how do you crucify the old man? By living in the new man. You do things God's way. It says if you walk in the Spirit, you won't fulfill the lust of the flesh. You won't let the flesh come to the forefront if you're living your life for Jesus Christ and letting Him control you, lead you, guide you, fill you. If you do all those things, then the flesh will not rear its head. When you put your guard down, however, and you do that in the midst of crisis, and you do that when you get aggravated, and you get upset, and your mind is taken off the things of God, and the flesh comes up and says, I'll handle this, step aside. And it'll come out. It'll come out. And you probably realize at points when the flesh has come out, and you felt it come out, and you felt guilty and shame afterwards, but maybe even when you were acting out and the flesh was doing something, you knew it wasn't right, but you didn't stop it. Your emotions get high, something happens, and some of the stores we're going in. Last night we went to someone's house, and they went to go pick up something to eat, and they showed us pictures. They went to go find food. There was no food to find. All the meat was empty. It was empty. It was gone, completely gone. It says, wow. You couldn't find meat. You couldn't find rubbing alcohol. You couldn't find sanitizer. You couldn't find toilet paper. And people were saying, well, when are you going to stock it? And they said, it was stocked today. It was stocked this morning. And by early afternoon, it was gone. So if you're going to go to the store, don't go in the afternoon. Why? Because the flesh will come out, that's why. Go in the morning and don't. The flesh is going to be there in the morning too. So I'm getting mine. You'll push an old lady out of the way to get what you want. And that's not nice. So behave yourselves. Don't do it. But if you walk in the Spirit, then you won't fulfill the lust of the flesh. That means you have to have the Spirit of Christ indwelling you, leading you, guiding you. You submit to it. You surrender. I remember this one man years ago. He would come up and pray at the end of the service, and he'd pray, and he'd rededicate his life, and he'd rededicate his life, and he'd rededicate his life. Multiple times he did that. And he came to me one day and said, preacher, how come rededicate my life, nothing happens? I said, do you want to know the real answer? He goes, yes. I said, here's the real answer. When you rededicate your life, you are still in control, and that's a problem. You need to surrender your life and stop rededicating it. Because as long as you're in control, you're not going to have any victory. You need to surrender your life and stop rededicating it. When you rededicate, you know what happens? You rededicate, you set the parameters, you set the boundaries, you set all these things, and you're saying, God, please bless my mess. And God says, I'm not going to do that. And how many of you said, well, I'm going to rededicate my life and nothing's happened? The problem is you are still in control. As long as the flesh still has a say-so in the matter, it's not going to go well for the home team. What you have to do is surrender your life, lay it down and say, I have no rights. I'm doing things God's way, and that's the way it's going to go. And every time the flesh says, I object, I don't care what you say. You have no say-so. Do you find yourself sometimes, in the flesh and the spirit, do you find yourself arguing with yourself sometimes? Or am I the only one? Because now we have this discussion. I want to do it. No, yes, no, yeah. Okay, we'll do it. And people look at you like you're crazy, but a battle is going on, and hopefully the spirit wins because it won't be good for the other person in front of you. You remember the Hulk before the monster came out? Don't make me angry. You won't like me when I'm angry. And that's the flesh. Don't bring the flesh out. You're not going to like what you see. And I remember I was running for kind of the office on the school board, one of the ladies said to me in a meeting, said, you need